If Trump was ready to launch one of the biggest attacks of the war, why did he stop at the last moment? That is the question at the center of this entire crisis. Because according to new reporting, the United States was preparing a massive bombing campaign against Iran. Not a small warning strike, not a symbolic response, a major attack that could have become one of the largest operations of the conflict so far. And then, suddenly, Trump called it off. On the surface, that sounds like de-escalation. But look closer. Trump did not cancel the attack because the crisis is over. He canceled it while saying America is still locked and loaded. He canceled it while warning that strikes can resume quickly. He canceled it while saying the deal must happen fast. And he canceled it only after Iran and several Middle Eastern countries reportedly asked Washington to hold off. That is not peace. That is pressure diplomacy. A gun is still on the table. The target list still exists. The aircraft can still move. The missiles can still fly. The only thing that changed is that Trump is giving diplomacy one more narrow window. And that window is built around two huge demands. First, the complete opening of the Strait of Hormuz. Second, an end to Iran's nuclear threat. Those 2 points explain why this moment is so important. Hormuz is not just a waterway. It is one of the arteries of the global economy. If Iran controls it, threatens it, or keeps it unstable, oil markets feel it almost immediately. Gulf states feel it. Europe feels it. Asia feels it. American voters feel it at the pump. And the nuclear issue is even bigger. Because for Washington, the real fear is not only what Iran can do today, it is what Iran may be able to do tomorrow if this conflict ends without serious limits. So Trump is trying to force Iran into a deal by showing that the alternative is worse. No deal means more pressure. No deal means financial pain. No deal means more isolation. And if needed, no deal means the bombing campaign returns. But here's the problem. Iran may not see this pause as mercy. Iran may see it as time. Time to regroup. Time to divide Washington from its Gulf partners. Time to wait for American political pressure to rise. Time to hope oil prices, elections, and public fatigue force Trump to step back. That is why Saudi Arabia's role matters so much. If the Saudi crown prince really asked Trump to hold off, that tells us something important. Even America's regional partners do not want this war to spiral out of control. They may want Iran pressured, but they do not want the Gulf turned into a permanent battlefield. So the real story is not that Trump chose peace over war. The real story is that every major player is now trying to control the clock. Trump wants a fast deal before Iran stalls. Iran wants time before pressure breaks it. Saudi Arabia wants de-escalation before the Gulf burns. Qatar and other mediators want diplomacy before the missiles return. And the world economy wants Hormuz open before oil prices explode. This is why the next few days matter. Because Trump has not put the war away. He has paused it. And a paused war is not the same as an ended war. The question now is simple. Did Iran just get one last chance to make a deal? Or did Trump give Tehran exactly what it wanted? More time. Before we call this peace, look at what actually happened. Trump did not announce a final agreement. He did not say the Iran crisis was solved. He did not say the military option was gone. He said the United States was locked and loaded, ready to strike, and that he canceled the attack only because Iran and several Middle Eastern countries asked for time to make a deal. That is not the language of peace. That is the language of a man holding a loaded weapon while giving the other side one final chance to move. And that is why this moment is so important. Because the canceled strike was reportedly not small. It was supposed to be one of the largest bombing campaigns of the war so far. That means aircraft, targets, planners, intelligence, munitions, and regional coordination were already moving toward action. This was not a random threat thrown online. This was a real military option sitting close enough to execution that Trump could pause it and use the pause as leverage. And that tells us something about his strategy. Trump is not trying to calm the crisis by stepping back. He is trying to force Iran to believe that the next refusal could bring a much heavier price. That is why the deal outline matters. The two main demands are huge: the complete opening of the Strait of Hormuz and an end to Iran's nuclear threat. Those are not minor technical points. They are the two biggest pillars of Iran's leverage. Hormuz gives Iran economic leverage over the world. The nuclear issue gives Iran strategic leverage over the future. If Iran gives up both, it loses the two tools that made Washington and the region pay attention in the first place. So when Trump says the parameters of a deal have been agreed to, the real question is not whether words exist on paper. The real question is whether Iran is actually ready to surrender the leverage behind those words. Because opening Hormuz completely means Iran accepts that it cannot use the world's oil artery as a pressure tool whenever Washington hits it. And ending the nuclear threat means Iran accepts limits on the one issue that has shaped decades of confrontation with the West. That is not a small concession. That is a strategic retreat. So why would Iran agree? This is where pressure comes in. The administration's argument is that Iran has finally reached a point where the cost is becoming too high. Military strikes have damaged capabilities. Financial pressure is tightening. Regional partners are active. The threat of more bombing remains alive. And Gulf countries are pushing Tehran to choose negotiation before the situation becomes uncontrollable. Marco Rubio's argument is simple. Iran has spent years lying, delaying, breaking agreements, and avoiding consequences. But now, under Trump, the cost is finally becoming too expensive to ignore. That is the official story. But Iran may see the same moment very differently. From Tehran's view, Trump canceled the strike because regional partners asked him to. The Saudis reportedly urged him to hold off. Qatar helped with talks. Other Middle Eastern states pushed de-escalation. That means Iran can tell itself something very important. America may be powerful, but America is not acting alone. It has to listen to the Gulf. It has to watch oil markets. It has to worry about regional partners. It has to think about the price of escalation. And that gives Iran space to play for time. This is the hidden battle now. Not bombs versus missiles. Time versus pressure. Trump believes time is on his side because he can strike whenever he wants. He can pause today and resume tomorrow. He can let financial pressure continue even when aircraft are not flying. He can tell Iran that the military threat does not disappear just because one attack was canceled. But Iran may believe time is on its side too. Iran may think American political will weaken. It may think rising fuel prices will pressure Trump. It may think Gulf states will keep asking Washington to slow down. It may think the longer negotiations continue, the more space it has to rebuild, reposition, divide the coalition, and avoid a humiliating surrender. That is why this pause is so unstable. Both sides think they can use it. Trump thinks he is giving Iran one last chance before the hammer falls. Iran may think it has forced Washington to delay. Saudi Arabia may think it has bought the region breathing room. Qatar may think diplomacy is still alive. But these are not the same goals. Trump wants fast movement. Iran wants survival. Saudi Arabia wants stability. Mediators want time. And the global economy wants Hormuz open before the next shock. That is why the Saudi role is so important. Saudi Arabia is not asking for calm because it suddenly trusts Iran. It is asking for calm because it understands the cost of a wider Gulf war better than almost anyone. If the United States and Iran enter a heavy escalation, the damage does not stay in Tehran. It spreads through oil prices, shipping routes, Gulf infrastructure, military bases, insurance markets, and regional security. Saudi Arabia can support pressure on Iran and still fear a war that burns too hot. That is not contradiction. That is strategy. The Saudis want Iran contained, but they do not want the Gulf economy thrown into chaos. They want American power, but they do not want uncontrolled escalation. They want Hormuz open, but they know Iran may use Hormuz as retaliation if strikes go too far. So when the Saudi crown prince reportedly asks Trump to hold off, it shows us something critical. Even America's closest regional partners are not simply cheering for more bombs. They are trying to manage the consequences. That means Trump's power is real, but it is not unlimited. He can order strikes, but he cannot ignore oil markets forever. He can threaten Iran, but he cannot force Gulf allies to enjoy the blowback. He can say America is locked and loaded, but if the region says, wait, give diplomacy one more chance, he has to calculate whether launching anyway would isolate Washington from the very partners it needs. And that is what makes this moment more complex than the headline. The strike was canceled, but the pressure campaign continues. Military pressure remains. Financial pressure remains. Political pressure remains. Regional pressure remains. The threat of renewed strikes remains. This is not de-escalation in the normal sense. It is escalation put on pause. and a paused escalation can restart very quickly. The key issue now is whether Iran gives Trump something he can present as victory. A full Hormuz reopening, a public commitment not to threaten shipping, a serious nuclear concession, a framework that looks bigger than another delay. Because Trump cannot simply pause forever. If Iran uses the delay to stall, he will face pressure to prove the threat was real. If he waits too long, critics will say Iran played him. If he strikes too soon, the region could accuse him of destroying a possible deal. That is the trap. The pause creates opportunity, but it also creates expectations. And expectations can be dangerous. Because if Trump says a deal is close and then the deal fails, the next strike becomes easier to justify. He can say, I gave them a chance. They wasted it. Iran can say, America never wanted peace. It only wanted surrender. Gulf states can say, we tried to stop it. And the world can watch as a canceled attack becomes the argument for an even bigger one. That is why we should not mistake this moment for an ending. It is a test of Iran's seriousness, a test of Trump's patience, a test of Saudi influence, a test of Qatar's mediation, a test of whether Hormuz can be separated from the nuclear issue, and a test of whether pressure can produce diplomacy before diplomacy collapses back into war. Right now, the war has not ended. It has moved into a narrower, more dangerous space. The bombs are paused. The deal is not finished. The military is still ready. The Gulf is still nervous. Iran is still calculating. And Trump is still holding the option to strike. That is why the next few days matter more than the last few headlines. Because if Iran truly agrees to open Hormuz and move on the nuclear issue, Trump will claim his pressure worked. But if Iran delays, blurs the language, or tries to keep leverage while pretending to compromise, the canceled strike may return. And next time, it may not be canceled. Now the real question becomes this: what happens inside the pause? Because canceling the strike is not the same as ending the war. It only means the battlefield has moved from the air to the negotiating table for a short period of time. And in many ways, that table may be more dangerous than the battlefield. Because the expectations are now extremely high. Trump has already said the rough outline of a deal exists. He has already said it would include the complete opening of the Strait of Hormuz and an end to Iran's nuclear threat. He has already told the world that he canceled the attack because a deal could be made quickly. So now, if the deal fails, the political argument for the next strike becomes stronger. Trump can say, I gave Iran a chance. I listened to regional allies. I paused the military. I chose peace first. And Iran wasted the opportunity. That is powerful framing. It means the canceled attack may become the justification for a larger attack later. This is why the next phase is not a soft phase, it is a pressure phase. The aircraft may not be flying tonight, but the pressure is still moving. Financial pressure continues, diplomatic pressure continues, regional pressure continues. The military remains ready, and Iran now has to decide how much it is willing to concede without appearing to collapse. That is the hardest part for Tehran, because the two demands are not small. Opening Hormuz completely means Iran admits the Strait is an international waterway that cannot be controlled through threats. It means Iran gives up the ability to say ships move only under its conditions. It means the world's oil artery goes back to being a global passage, not an Iranian bargaining chip. And handing over or ending the nuclear threat is even bigger. That is not a technical detail. That is the issue that has defined Iran's confrontation with the West for decades. If Iran gives too much, it looks like surrender. If it gives too little, Trump can say diplomacy failed. So Iran needs ambiguity. It may offer language that sounds strong, but leaves room for interpretation. It may say it supports safe navigation, but still wants a regional mechanism. It may say it does not seek nuclear weapons, but resist handing over materials. It may promise cooperation, but demand sanctions relief first. That is where the fight will happen. Not in dramatic slogans, but in wording. Open versus managed. Guarantee versus best efforts. End the nuclear threat versus peaceful nuclear rights. Capitulation versus sovereignty. International waterway versus regional security mechanism. Those words may sound boring, but they can decide whether the missiles fly again. And this is where mediators become critical. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and other regional partners are not just background players. They are now shaping the pause. Qatar has helped talks on reopening the Strait. Saudi Arabia reportedly asked Trump to hold off. These countries are not doing this because they trust Iran completely. They are doing it because they understand the cost of failure. If Hormuz closes again, the Gulf pays first. If Iran retaliates, Gulf states are exposed. If America strikes too hard, the region absorbs the shock. If oil prices rise, Gulf governments face pressure from every direction. So Saudi Arabia's message is not, protect Iran. The message is, do not let this spiral into a war nobody can control. That is why this moment reveals something important about American power. The United States can strike Iran whenever it wants. But even America has to manage the coalition around the strike. It has to listen to Saudi Arabia. It has to consider Qatar's mediation. It has to watch oil markets. It has to calculate how Gulf partners will respond if the conflict expands. That means pressure on Iran is also pressure on America's own alliance system. Trump may see time as being on his side because he can return to military action at any moment. But Iran may see the same clock differently. Tehran may think that every day without a strike gives it room to survive. Every day gives it room to split regional partners from Washington. Every day gives oil markets more reason to pressure the United States for stability. Every day gives American politics more time to ask why this war is continuing. That is the time game. And Iran has played it before. Delay, negotiate, offer partial movement, demand guarantees, use regional mediators, wait for pressure inside Washington to rise, then give just enough to avoid the next strike, but not enough to lose leverage completely. The question is whether Trump will allow that. His team is clearly trying to show that this time is different. The message from Rubio is that Iran has finally met a president willing to impose real consequences. The argument is that Tehran got used to years of delay, broken promises, and diplomatic tricks. But now the price is becoming too high. That is the pressure strategy. Make the price too high to pay. But pressure only works if the other side believes the threat will continue. If Iran thinks Trump canceled because he does not really want escalation, it will stall. If Iran thinks the Saudis and Qataris can keep buying time, it will stretch the talks. If Iran thinks American voters fear oil prices more than they fear Iran, it will wait. So Trump has to convince Tehran that the pause is temporary. Not weakness, temporary. That is why the phrase locked and loaded matters. It is designed to tell Iran that the military option has not disappeared. The planes can still move. The target list can still be activated. The attack can still return. But this creates a dangerous situation, because when one side says, we are giving you one last chance, and the other side says, we will not surrender under threats, the space for compromise becomes very narrow. Iran cannot look like it folded. Trump cannot look like he got played. Saudi Arabia cannot let the Gulf explode. Qatar cannot mediate forever. And Hormuz cannot remain half open, half threatened, and half negotiated for long. At some point, the pause has to become one of two things: a real deal, or the argument for the next attack. And this is why the nuclear issue is so dangerous. Hormuz can be measured quickly. Ships either move or they do not. Insurance either calms or it does not. Tankers either pass or avoid the route. But the nuclear issue is much harder. What does ending Iran's nuclear threat actually mean? Does it mean handing over enriched material? Does it mean shutting down facilities? Does it mean inspections? Does it mean dismantling equipment? Does it mean a permanent limit? Does it mean Iran gives up capabilities or only promises not to weaponize them? Every answer creates a different deal, and every version creates a different political problem. For Trump, a weak nuclear deal would look like failure after months of war. For Iran, a strong nuclear concession may look like surrender after surviving the strikes. For Israel, any deal that leaves Iran with future capability may be unacceptable. For Gulf states, any deal that fails to calm Hormuz is not enough. So the deal has to satisfy too many audiences at once. That is why it may be so hard to finish. A deal for Washington must look like victory. A deal for Tehran must not look like humiliation. A deal for Saudi Arabia must protect the Gulf. A deal for Israel must reduce the nuclear danger. A deal for markets must reopen Hormuz. A deal for Trump must happen quickly. That is an extremely difficult package. And if even one major actor rejects it, the pause could collapse. This is why the next few days are not just diplomatic theater. They may decide whether this war enters a new phase. If Iran gives Trump a clear Hormuz opening and a serious nuclear concession, he will present the pause as proof that pressure worked. He will say the threat of force delivered what diplomacy alone could not. But if Iran offers vague wording, delays the hard issues, or tries to keep control over Hormuz while promising peace, Trump may decide the pause has failed. And then the attack he canceled becomes the attack he says Iran forced him to launch. That is the danger. The pause is not neutral. It is building the story for what comes next. If diplomacy works, it becomes the story of Trump forcing Iran into a deal. If diplomacy fails, it becomes the story of Trump giving Iran one final chance before unleashing force. Either way, the pressure remains. So do not mistake the cancellation of strikes for calm. The war is still there. It is in the skies waiting for orders. It is in Hormuz waiting for ships. It is in Oman and Qatar waiting for language. It is in Saudi Arabia waiting for stability. It is in Iran waiting for a decision. And it is in Washington waiting for Trump to decide whether the pause has produced enough. That is where the crisis stands now. Not peace, not full war, a loaded pause. And a loaded pause can be more dangerous than an open fight because everyone is pretending there is time, while every side is already preparing for what happens if time runs out. So before you go, tell me in the comments, did Trump cancel the strike because Iran is finally ready to make a real deal? Or did Iran just buy enough time to survive the next round? Because if this pause fails, the next attack may not be canceled.